Hello, Joe. So for those of you that have joined us already, we're Pat Brophy, who normally runs these things, runs Whiskey Wednesday for Vinny's, is in Ely, Minnesota, helping an uncle set up a cabin. So they've made the unfortunate decision to let me run this thing. So I'd like to welcome everybody to Whiskey Wednesdays with the Vinny's Whiskey Hotline. Representing the hotline this week are myself, Brett Pontani, and Joe Maloney. In the behind the black blob, whatever that is our host of the Barrel to Bottle podcast, Greg Versch, who is also manning the control booth today. But you're not here to see us. You're here to see Sam Schmeltzer, who is, Sam, what exactly is your title?
It's a mouthful. So it's alcohol application chemist / master blender.
Okay. That's a good title.
Yeah, that was my actual.
That master blender. So the first thing we need to get out of the way for those folks, and I think a number of people that are watching today will have been watching us on Wednesday when we were talking to Dave Whitmer. So the first question we have before we get started and start talking about MGP, and more specifically the rye portion, is what is the funniest practical joke you've ever played on Dave?
Oh, geez. I'm not. So Dave is at our corporate headquarters in Kansas. So I probably get to see David, I'd say about once a quarter, give or take. When he's in here for audits, different customers, when you guys come to town, David usually always in here. So a handful of times throughout the year. So I don't have a story as far as practical jokes, but I will say there is one story where, so you guys have been, you've been to the CIC, and we have those emblems on like the frosted glass and all that stuff.
Right. Yeah, sure.
So we actually didn't have those emblems on our glass, and we put those frosted specks in there because somebody actually ran into the glass because it was closed. Giant face print, something like that. So it's probably one of the funniest stories I have at MGP that involves some funny gags.
Okay, well that's good because we also don't want to get you in trouble. So
yeah.
So the reason that we've spent the last couple of days with both you and David have to do with us finally, after a lot of begging, being able to do barrel programs. And we piloted it a year ago when we were able to put together some batches of Rossville, which is really how that product is normally constructed. And that went extremely well. So we were given the opportunity this year to help you guys pilot a program of single barrels under both the Rossville, or the George Remus bourbon label, and the Rossville rye label. And the Remus was fantastic. I think that there was a lot of anticipation for the Rossville because anybody who has been drinking American whiskey, bourbon, and especially rye for the last 20 years knows just how important MGP is in terms of rye production, not only for themselves, but for a lot of brands that go out on contract, which was originally the part of the business. So
right.
When did you start, and what do you, just tell us a little bit about your rye production and what makes you unique.
So kind of like you said, since even through the passing of the hands through the distillery age, so Seagram's, Pernod, LDI, MGP, the distillery is known for its rye production. There's kind of 2 points that I usually tell people. So one of the main points for actually handling rye and making rye whiskey is you have to have the ability to dry it. And for the Lawrenceburg distillery, we have that really, really nice ability to dry the DDG once the grain has been passed through our system. So like, let's say you're making our 95% rye or 100% rye mash bill, that gets very gummy, very syrupy. What I tell people is if you would go through our dryer house, you might see syrup balls the size of Jolly Ranchers or Jawbreakers, something like that. If you don't have other stillage to mix that with, it gets very tricky to dry the right grain. Also, really the whole facility is designed to run rye grain. So back in the day when, so that was the Seagram days when they were building the facility, they had the foresight to understand that they needed to design things and engineer things to actually produce rye whiskey. So we can actually give a lot of thanks to the people who had the distillery before us. So that is a big deal. And then the ability to have, a GNS system with also a whiskey system allows us to dry the rye grain very, very well. And of course, the capacity of the distillery is crazy. It's very interesting. When I first started at the distillery in 2013, it was very hard for me to visualize the actual engineering process because of the massive size of the distillery. It would actually been a lot easier to go to a craft distillery to understand kind of the process and how everything flows. But that's why we have blueprints, and I've gotten very good at reading those and looking at the flow charts that we have for the distillery and all that jazz. So yeah, the main answer to your question is really the ability to dry rye allows us to have the capacity to make it so well. And I mean, also the expertise of our master distillers, the engineers throughout the decades that place has been producing really great whiskey. That knowledge has been passed down, and I can't state how important that is.
Well, and it's a tremendous amount of foresight too, which you said, because when MGP was producing and developing all these systems under, I would assume, the Seagram's ownership, and we talked on Wednesday about how experimental the Seagram's company was, and how many important how many important standards they set in distillation in general. But they would have been doing rye at a time when rye wasn't popular. So a lot of people right now might forget the fact that even 5 years ago, right, rye was just starting to hit and sit on people's consciousness. So it's only been in the last 5 years that this is all of a sudden a big deal, and you need to move forward. So tell us a little bit about the Rossville brand. So, we know that Seagram's distilled a lot of rye. When MGP took over, they continued that tradition, and in fact might have increased it, just sort of following trends with consumers consuming more. So eventually you got to the point where you decided, I'm assuming, hey, we make some of the best rye, if not the best rye in the United States, and none of it ever has our name on it. We're going to put our name on it. So tell us a little bit about where Rossville came from.
So the actual Rossville branding comes from George Ross's distillery back in 1847. It's actually a decade before you'd see, if you went to the warehouses in Seagram's, they state 1857. So the branding on the brand is kind of to pay tribute to the very, very first distillers on site where we have our Seagram's distillery, MGP distillery in Lawrenceburg, Indiana. The story that we kind of gathered from historical documents and data, George Ross had a one-eyed horse. He'd make like a barrel of whiskey a day. So not the capacity that we're making it, obviously. That's the original branding. It's a great name. It's a great story. As far as the decision on kind of getting our name out there for the rye category, you kind of hit the nail on the head. We know we make really, really delicious rye whiskey. And I can remember the day that I remember hearing the announcement and thinking, I can't wait to get my hands on these barrels in these warehouses to create this brand. So that was a really exciting day for all of us at MGP when that news kind of hit. So that's kind of a roundabout way of the branding. As far as a flavor profile standpoint, we kind of took the route of, well, do we want this to be a rye whiskies rye brand, or do you want it to be something that's kind of entry level to get people into rye? And that's kind of the two brands that we came up with Mastercraft and then Barrel Proof. It hit both points. Mastercraft is it's a rye whiskey that uses our 51% rye, 45% corn mash bill, and also our 95% rye mash bill with the 5% malted barley. So what we did is we took those two mash bills and had different formulations for the different products. So Mastercraft is a little bit lighter, a little bit more corn heavy, and it gets people into rye whiskey that might be a little bit timid on that really, really high rye spice. Whereas Barrel Proof, that's probably one of my, as far as a team goes, I'm really proud of MGP's blending team. What we were able to create with Barrel Proof, just because the rye flavor profile, it was not something that was easy. We had to go through a lot of barrels, a lot of surveying to make sure we got it right. But the finish on that Barrel Proof to me is something that's amazing. It keeps going until you have water, something to eat, something else to drink. So in a roundabout way, that's the short version. If there's other details you want me to go farther into, yeah, I can do
Well,
that.
it interests me that you guys, the approach you took, because you really wanted to make something friendly. I think that all of the rye nerds, and you probably get this all the time, you probably have even gotten it from us at one point in time or another, is the question is like, well, you make 95.5, you're going to make rye, why don't you just do the 95? You know, I'm sure that people just compulsively really push you guys on the 95.5 and don't understand probably why that hasn't been one of the releases. So and that was on purpose, I'm assuming.
So that, yes, it was on purpose. And I would imagine, I don't know this for a fact, I'm hopeful that in the coming years, what you're kind of hinting towards, that is something that we maybe can release as one entity. We'll see. I'm not 100% sure. The 51% rye, and then because we'll get into this with your rye picks as well. So the 51% rye, 45% corn, and then the 51% rye, 49% malted barley. Those are two mash bills that are very distinctly different than the 95.5. And as far as doing the single barrels that way, it was kind of a way to establish a totally different flavor profile, if that makes sense.
Sure. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. What I really like about this is the anticipation of when and if we are going to do something that's just 95.5. And if that point comes, we have some really, really good barrels that we have an eye on. So we'll see what happens in the future for that.
Yeah. Well, you picked, I think, for us as we go into, and Joe, if you have the details, we're going to have you real quick in a second go over the details of the barrels we picked and what the compositions were. Do you have that information in front of you?
I do have it in front of me.
I apologize to everybody. I'm actually at a brandy distillery in California right now. I've been harvesting grapes all morning, so just made it back in time to do so. That is a traditional Charente still that you would never, ever make rye whiskey, and it probably wouldn't turn out very well. But it's interesting you said, it's funny that you took, and what, especially focusing on the high malt, what was the motivation behind picking the high malt? Because that's really an outlier that I don't think people really think about at all. That is the third grain that's in virtually every single bourbon or rye that never gets talked about.
It was so the high malt products, what was really interesting about that flavor profile. So we did some experimental mash bills in the 2012-2013 area. Now that was one of them. And that was one of the products that, kind of like you said, you would never think about, at least I would never think about either. It was so unique that I felt like we had to offer.
Okay, good. Well, and it did. And what do you think is what, and you know, everybody, we all have an idea of what we think happens. What do you think you get out of having the malt? Because it's essentially replacing corn. So right. What characters do you get by replacing the corn with malt? I mean, how does that change the profile?
I tend to tell people it's the perfect mix between Irish whiskey, or not a very heavily peated Scotch, but you could put Scotch in that category, and then you combine that with rye whiskey. So I always think of like malted milk balls, heavy green apples, and then I put mocha chocolate in there too. Yeah. Then you combine that with floral, mint, herbal, spice. It really is like forward. It's just straight malt whiskey, in my opinion, because you get that really rich nuttiness, caramel, green apple, but then you get really nice spice linger too. So
which is that appley grassy, definitely. That appley grassy character that I think actually enhances and gives a little bit more of a, you know, you get more grain character out of the rye too, I think, without being aggressively. I mean, MGP Ryes to me aren't attacking anyway, and aren't heavily mint forward, and aren't heavily dill forward, which are two characteristics I think a lot of people get. Joe, so we did 6 barrels of Rossville. Joe, could you just cover real quick what the barrels are and what their composition is?
Yeah, so we got the total of the 6, like you said. 4 of them are the 51 rye, 45 corn, 4 barley. Those are barrels 508, 512, 563, and 567. And then we have two barrels that were the 51% rye and the 49% barley, which would be 467 and 475. And all those specs are on the reviews too. So if you didn't catch all that, you can always click on the reviews on our website, and it gives you all that rundown. For me, the high malt contents for me almost gives that rye like the cakey sort of thing to it. Kind of thickens the whole thing up for me and softens it, which I find that I really enjoy. So we're really, really happy that we got these.
Yeah, that's good. So Sam, you've tried through everything. What did you initially think? What are your two favorites out of the barrels that we selected?
If I'm going to go, I'll probably go favorites by type. So the high malt and then the higher corn. I shouldn't say high corn, but so 475, 467. I'd pick 475, and kind of what Joe was talking about. To me, that one had probably the most viscous mouthfeel. Right. And when you say syrupy, cakey, like it does make sense. If you compare those to the 51% with the 45% corn, so 508, 512, 563, it's so different. And it's crazy to me that it can be that different and then still be considered a rye whiskey. Some of my tasting notes for 475, syrup malt, great mouthfeel, caramel, barrel char, spice, malt finish linger, and then I always call it like the rye tingle. So it's almost like a spearmint cinnamon, and then that just kind of stays on your tongue for a while. That's my tasting notes for 475. I actually really liked, so 563, that was my favorite of the 51% rye, 45% corn. So I get smoky. When I say smoky, I'm thinking more of barrel char. I'm not thinking like a peated smoke. I always like to explain that to people. So smoky apple / fruit, and then it almost has a really, really nice, I call it like alcohol, ethanol bite, and then it has the spice in there from the rye too. So it's even got a little bit of heat, enough heat that I would say with 51% rye, you kind of almost get sort of a bourbon flavor profile. But for me, that one had more of a rye whiskey flavor profile, and that's what I liked about it too. Because sometimes even the barrel adds a little spice. You get tannic char as well. So that's what's really interesting with all these single barrels is you can get different levels of that tannic char spice.
Sure. Now and we talked to David the other day about sort of the selection when these barrels came up, we always when we talk to consumers or talk to people, customers, about how we go about selecting single barrels. We always try to explain to them, first of all, just so you don't understand, it's not like we didn't drive to Lawrenceburg, Indiana one day, grab a set of keys to a warehouse and say, well, we're going to take that one and we're going to take that one and we're going to take that one. You guys are obviously have to go through and profile all of your stocks so you know what you have for your own products, so you know what you have to sell. So how were these, like the pool of samples that we tasted, how do you go about drawing those together for this selection process to then go to the next step, which is a retailer or a bar or a restaurant picking?
So really, I mean, that's a great question. Really, it boils down to choices. So we want to give everyone the best array of choices that we can offer. And so that was the one thing I really wanted to point out to you guys today was you covered the entire spread as far as warehouse locations, different warehouses, and then different barreling dates as far as which picks you went through. And I mean, that's a great thing. So really, and I would say 75% of my job is like what you said, where you're going through inventories, surveying, making flavor libraries so you know what you're working with when you're doing blending projects. For single barrel, it's really fun because when we're sampling these barrels, usually for bulk dumps, it's by batch. So you're taking a few samples, compositing those, and that makes the batch. So with single barrels, it's really fun because you have all these different multiple barrels within the batches, and they're all a little bit different. So you get a little bit different flavor profiles for every barrel or so. But as far as what's offered, we wanted to give basically as many choices as possible to our customers. And I can't remember, I mean, geez, you guys tasted through a decent amount of samples that day. I think David was sitting with you. You guys were one of the few that I didn't get to sit with that day. And it does boil down to palate fatigue too. So you guys are really used to doing this. So I was really excited to have you guys in here just to taste through everything, to see what you really liked, and if there were things that you thought weren't exactly, I'm not going to say non-stellar, but things you passed over and why. So that was really interesting to see.
Yeah, well, and I think, and we do, because that's the whole thing about doing a single barrel, and taking a pass on a single barrel doesn't mean that in and of it, and even us is just like, we don't walk out and say, oh man, I'm glad that we got those 6 because the rest were crappy. I mean, it's not the kind of thing that you would ever do. And it's funny because the way we did these, I think it deviated a little bit from the Remus, because there was an array of character in the Remus, but they all ended up kind of being from the same place. And then the Rossville seemed to be the exact opposite. They were all over the place. I don't think the age variance was that much. They were all roughly 6, right? Or all the 5145s were all 6 years old, right?
They were 5.
That's right.
5 years. Okay. And then what was the age on the two higher malts?
Those would have been 5-ish too, give or take.
5 to 6. Okay.
Yep.
So it's interesting, but we do that, and it's sort of what, if you get an opportunity to do something with a place like MGP, because of the versatility, that is one of your hallmarks, is the versatility, and the quality is there, and then you have all kinds of variation on that same very sort of high level of quality. So I think when we did these, that's why we were quite pleased to have a wide range of styles and to be able to cover that. And it's also good because it's unfortunate Pat isn't here, because at this point in time, Pat would be either berating me or berating Joe over our choices right now. Once we went through and
berating you, Pat and I, we choose the same.
You guys, please. He would be, although I'm kind of in lockstep with you. I mean, I was the same way. My interest in I really liked the high malt, both of them. And I think because of that you just get the things that I expect to get from malt. You get the fruit, that sort of palm fruit, apple pear sort of thing. And for me, there's a little bit of grassiness, which I like, which is sort of a light character that borders on grainy. And Brad, it's funny. I think the people think that if they drink a wheated bourbon, they're going to get something that can be bready, when in reality, I think that you get that character more from rye, really, than you do from wheat, or it is one of the many characters you can get from that. And then Joe, what did you have on for your picks? What were you really hitting on, or what have you been recommending people to try?
Well, honestly, like, all of them are fantastic. But I always leave myself little clues in the tasting reviews that I write. And I've got one of my little clues here on barrel number 563 being one of my favorites. So that one for sure stuck out for me. And then I think 467, let's see, 467 and 475. I think it was 467 of the two with the high barley malts that I liked the best. But they all are fantastic. There's not a bad one in the bunch. Thanks, and luckily for us, because that's what a treat to have ryes like this that are mature and rich. Now, Joe Carr has typed in here for us that 45% barley were all 6-year-old. So I don't know if it got bottled later or
Sam.
what,
Well, he said they were barreled 2014. So it sounds like they might not have made it quite to 6, though, right, Sam?
It just it depends on the bottling dates.
Yeah.
2000. When you say 2014, when you do the actual years, you could say probably insinuate 6, but it just depends on the month and the bottling dates.
Well, it does, and you know what? And that's another thing we want to get
about the barley malt ones. For me personally, I find that provided like a greater sort of weight, a more kind of like a roundness to the rye that you don't typically get. But that's what that barley malt adds for me. I think is just the mouthfeel that kind of stretches it all out for me, that I really like about that one, or those two.
Yeah.
And then how have you found the maturation of those barrels? Is the maturation speed, or are the flavor profile, the flavor profiles of the maturation with the high malt experiment that you're doing? One, are you still doing it as a mash bill that is getting regularly barreled? And two, how is that maturation sort of line different, or is it the same as some of the other recipes?
Another great question. So yes, we're still making it. That's going to be something as far as MGP goes. I mean, I would be very surprised if that goes away in the future, because we've had very good feedback about that mash bill. What's very interesting about the high malt products is it's kind of as they get older, they don't get worse at all. And I'm not saying, when I say this, I'm not saying that by any means. What's really great about higher malt whiskey as far as this mash bill goes is that if you get it at a straight, so at 2-year-old, it's actually really delicious even at 2 years old. Don't get me wrong, it's great at 5 and 6 and probably on too. But it's even with higher malt products I've tasted that are in used barrels. So obviously these are considered rye whiskey, so new charred oak barrels. I've tasted material that's been in used barrels that's higher malt. It could either be 100% malt or some other type of different mash bill, and it kind of is the same way. It got me thinking too, because I do like Scotch. I don't have time to be into it as much as I am with whiskey. Whiskey's my job and bourbon's my job. But it got me thinking that maybe there's something to that higher malt mash bill, whereas it's such a dominant flavor profile that even at a younger age, it still tastes very, very good. So to answer your question, and for that mash bill and that higher malt, they can probably even be bottled and drank younger than a typical whiskey for some people who really like older stuff.
Yeah, well, we're a big, especially with the advent of the American single malt movement, which is really being driven by a lot of craft brands. One of the pieces that they want to be a part of it is is the allowance for aging and used cooperage. And I think that malt is extremely difficult. Malt doesn't, to me, like new wood very much. I think malt, to me, seems to fare a little bit better because all of that subtlety and nuance and that fruit and that grassiness can really be driven away by an aggressive amount of wood. So I would imagine that happens a little bit less with some of the projects that you're doing in reused cooperage rather than the brand new barrels. You know, it's why it's been a struggle, I think, for American single malt to establish itself on the map as a grain on its own. And it's interesting. There aren't a lot of people that are using it as you guys are as an enhancement to another product. Are you running any high malt bourbon experiments as well that might someday see the light of day?
So we've dabbed into that a little bit. Not sure if we're going to see that anytime soon as far as brands or anything like that. It's really interesting as far as as my personal opinion. I really like the rye with the malt better than the higher corn. I think the flavor profile it's really, really unique and it's really, really delicious. So the higher malts, even like a 100% malt, and like you said, in a new charred oak barrel, we don't have anything old enough to really say that, at like 10 years old, it might be too aggressive with the new wood. As far as the craft distillers go too, what's really interesting about the higher malts, if you're going to do an American single malt and you can sell that at straight, it does allow them a little bit more leeway as far as getting something on the market faster.
Sure.
But yeah, you can definitely go wrong with higher malts as well. And that's something that, as a small distillery or as a craft distillery, you kind of have to take a little bit of a gamble. And even if you're doing 1 or 2 barrels, 3 barrels here, you just got to see how it turns out at first. And if that's not something that you want to take down the road and make a brand, then yeah, you can switch over to something else. But yeah, the youngness, so the younger age of those malts, I feel like it is appealing for someone or for a craft distiller who really wants to get out in the market fast.
Yeah. Oh, 100%, 100%. It's necessary, but you got, it's that fine line between doing that, but making sure that you're not sacrificing quality, because
right.
it is it takes a lot of time to build a reputation. It only takes one mistake to destroy it. I think that you find that seems to be a big maxim in our business, both on the production side and even as a retail side. We just got a question, and I think that you earlier, Alexandra asked earlier, she said these ryes sound tasty. Are these available for bulk purchase or in MGP, or will they be bottled in MGP branded bottles in the future? In other words, is there any thought to making these variants of the Rossville, the regular Rossville line?
So you're saying if like the higher malt products, is that going to go into our Rossville line in future years?
Yeah.
It depends on inventory availability, depends on what we do as far as working with the blends to see if we can incorporate that into the Rossville line. I'm not going to say that it's out of the question. So I have to play, I have to play double agent really. So
sure.
Yes and no, we'll see. But
well, you're getting some data now, right? From us
right.
in this program, you're getting some good data about consumer acceptance. And then, and I'm assuming that the other piece of it, because you guys do that, that would be something that you guys would entertain making available for, bulk wholesale purchases. If somebody wanted to develop a brand, is there enough of that around that would be something you could sell to somebody on the bulk side, or is it just too limited for that to be available?
I wouldn't say it's limited. I would say that it honestly just depends on the scale, and it depends on really what as a company we want to make available. So our bulk sales, they have allocations. It is a very interesting concept as far as if that would be available for another brand or something like that. As far as I know right now, we are the only ones that are using it like a single barrel. And don't get me wrong, we have a lot of different customers, so you can't hold me to that as gospel, but it is very unique. And as far as the years go too, and that's what's so great about our warehouses and how we are a bulk supplier. Even different mash bills, different warehouses. When you're talking about different customers and different brands and all that stuff, things can taste different ages, different warehouses, locations within the warehouses. So that's what's so great about us as a bulk supplier.
Yeah, now it's interesting. And then our picks, you mentioned that it seemed to be the opposite of Remus. Remus, we seem to have pretty close to the same age. We got variation, but we seemed to the close age, seemingly close to the same age in the same warehouse. Now, one of the things that we talked about on Wednesday is just how stunningly consistent, because of their construction and the way that they were designed, how stunningly consistent MGP warehouses tend to be. How many different warehouses did these picks come out of, ultimately, out of our 6?
So the Ryes, that's what you're asking?
Yeah.
So 3 different warehouses.
Okay. So they were split, and I'm assuming a split of floors?
So let's see here. I can only give you higher and lower floors. Can't give you the exact floors, sadly. Yeah, so 2 were from higher floors, and then 4 were from the lower floors.
From lower floors. Okay. And we kind of talked about that the other day, the difference. So how did our alcohols change? What is your fill proof for these?
So barrel proof, these would be filled at 120 going into the barrel. Right. And obviously these are the bottling proofs at 100 because of the bottle and bond. So obviously water was added to them. Right. So what's really interesting is some of the lower floors are actually higher proof before the cutting than the higher floors. And that does have to do with some of the warehouses as far as where the sun hits them. And you guys probably went into that with your bourbon barrels as well. Based on the location where the warehouses are, there's a few of them that actually do sometimes increase in proof, whereas I'd say 90% of our inventory decreases in proof.
Yeah.
Yeah, those warehouses that bake in the sun, that's kind of as a blender, I love those 2 warehouses. I love going in there, smelling the fumes, and then seeing what kind of really, really delicious barrels come out of those. Well,
this is where also, if Pat were here and you were David, you could tell Pat that he knew that we were going to pick a whole bunch of high proof things because Pat seems to always complain about high proof, which is very, very true.
That's
But
funny.
but yeah, and it is different because I think we kind of described the other day, and one of the things that's unique about your warehouses is the fact that you actually have basements in a number of the warehouses, that there's actually a full story underneath. And we have had the opportunity to walk in there in the summer before, and it's absolutely suffocating when you walk into some of these with the alcohol, which people don't think. And that's probably, I think if people could actually smell that, it would help them to sort of understand and get their hands around the fact why you guys uniquely in the bourbon world and in the rye world actually lose proof, because that's not typical at all in the bourbon world. Typically, when you have such a hot environment and you can't release, when things aren't as stable as they are in your warehouses, you're going to start losing a lot of alcohol.
Right. It's very interesting that whatever's aging around some of the barrels too. I've seen higher proof products that don't go into the barrel at 120. They'll go in at 140. If you have some barrels around those barrels who are actually losing angel share, and some barrels will actually pick those up too. It's very, very interesting. But yeah, in the summertime can be tough for tours in the warehouse because my gosh, you can barely breathe sometimes.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
I have
So
two from the higher floors. Did those happen to be the 5149s?
Right. Yes. The 49. Yeah, the high malts were from the higher floors.
All right, good to know.
Did
what I was thinking.
Did I say so? You guessed that?
Yeah.
Without even knowing. That's impressive. That's good. So what is the future now that we've done this? What is the circle? Because I think we had some questions, and one of them, yes, I believe all the barrels are still available in a number of stores, but I also am pretty sure there aren't a whole hell of a lot of them because they've been on the shelf for about a week and a half now. So I would guess they're blasting through. Now that we have done this round, what is the next step, do you think, for the single barrel program for Rossville?
So David, Pam, myself, RJ, the 4 master blenders, we're getting together as far as organizing next year's picks, looking through the inventories, seeing what's going to be available. What's going to be great about next year is, so the bottled and bond, that won't be the case. So it won't be at 100 proof. We'll actually be doing barrel proof rye. So it'll be the same as the George Remus, barrel proof, no water added. I would imagine it'll be interesting to see if we have any higher proofs, because you guys pick some 120 and above proofs for your bourbons. It'll be interesting to see if we'll have any of those for the ryes. I'm not sure yet. Just kind of depends on where we have inventory and what pockets they're in.
Right.
But that's something to look forward to as well. So the 251% ryes will definitely be in the program, and we're waiting to see if we're going to expand that a little bit. We're not sure yet.
Right. Yeah, the 95.5, like I said, we can be patient. The 95.5, unless you want to do a Vinny's exclusive, because I think that we would be a great way to pilot this. Would be to get some proof of concept and get a lot of good marketing data, would be to just let us take a half a dozen barrels of the high rye of the 95.5, and we can probably get some of that to go through and just, tell you how consumer reaction is and all that.
Yeah, I'm not high enough to make that decision, sadly, because trust me, I'm waiting for it. I hope they announce something like that, because I'll be just as excited as you guys are when they do.
Yeah. Well, but I like the fact that it's unfolded. I think that you guys are on the right track in terms of what you're providing out there, because I think that everybody's chomping at the bit for the one that gets all the headlines, and I think that especially with these picks, that there's some proof of concept that it's wonderful that everybody gets excited about 95.5, but you don't fall asleep. Excuse me. Don't fall asleep on the other mash bills, because that's really the heart and soul of what you're doing when you're making rye, and that really allows rye to sort of have some accompaniment, not just be a one-trick pony.
Oh yeah, what we offered this one definitely proves that, and I was really happy that the feedback was so great for the different rye whiskeys that we offered, because in my opinion, I knew they were really delicious, but it's always great to hear other people say how much they like them as well.
Yeah. We'll keep it up. Well, Sam, thank you very much for taking some time with us on a late Friday afternoon. I'm guessing that you're an hour later than we are. Well, you're 3 hours later than I am because I'm in California. But you're an hour later than we are, and so we appreciate the time. We appreciate your insight, and we look forward to seeing you the next time we're down. Hopefully, we can get in early and get next year's, the 2021 barrel picks, moving along really quickly.
Yep.
All right.
But thanks for having me.
Yep. No, thank you very much for joining us. Joe, thanks for coming in. Greg, thanks for manning the booth while Pat is out gallivanting around. This will wrap up the Friday version of Benny's Whiskey Wednesday. Greg, do you have in front of you, or Joe, what do we have on tap next Wednesday?
Ooh, let's see here. I can look and see.
Sorry, this is awkward. Greg, yeah, you can't. Greg, you can edit this out, right?
Yeah, for sure. Facundo Rums.
Okay.
Yeah. Facundo Rums with Bacardi Global Master of Rums, David Sid, CID.
Oh, great. We've got a Whiskey Wednesday is going to be rum this coming weekend. Actually, we have Mezcal Monday. Mezcal Monday, we're going to be speaking our Mezcal 201. We're going to start to talk about definitions around different types of mezcal and how to read a mezcal label. So that's on Monday. So folks, thank you very much for joining us, and have a good weekend, and we'll see you on Monday for Mezcal Monday. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Sam.
Cheers.